Welcome to the Face-to-Face Ministries podcast. I'm Kathy Little.
And I'm Melinda Wilson, and we are talking all things inner healing, true connection with Jesus, and the full benefits package of the cross. Thank you for joining us. Welcome to Face-to-Face Ministries podcast, episode number 17.
17. Can you believe that?
So glad you're here.
Yeah, it's so wonderful. And we are really excited. The content is solid, and we're building this resource to educate people, inform people about walking in freedom and wholeness and healing here.
Absolutely.
And that's worth it. That's a big, big deal. Today, we're going to share with you another interview that we got from the Life Model Works Transform Conference in Denver.
We talked to Ed Khouri, who is, he has a wealth of experience. We'll let him introduce himself, but he was very fascinating to talk to. He's an addiction recovery expert, really, specialist.
Yeah.
Has decades of experience in addiction recovery, helping people see freedom. And I think that you will be surprised at what you hear. You do not have to have had or currently have an addiction to be very, very interested in this.
Yes.
I
bet everybody knows somebody that has, if they haven't themselves.
You might be, and I might be, and we all might be to some extent as you hear
addicted to something.
Ed Khouri has to say. So
yeah,
let that pique your interest enough to go ahead and listen.
So we're just going to let Ed Khouri speak for himself and enjoy this content on addiction and addiction recovery. He's got some great insight on what that really looks like, and it might not look like what you have traditionally thought it would. So here we go with Ed Khouri.
We're here with Ed Khouri today, and Ed, just tell us about who you are, where you live, what you do, and we'll go from there.
I live in North Carolina. My wife and I, together, we started and we lead a ministry called Equipping Hearts for the Harvest. We do a lot with brain science and working with scripture, but a lot with addictions and a lot with trauma, creating new models for communities and people.
So addiction. The question that rises to my mind is, how can Christians be addicted? How can they have it? We're going to just go right for the jugular here, Ed. We hear people say the finished work of the cross, or I shouldn't have any issues because of salvation. Then why do we find Christians having addictions? What's going on with that?
I think if we were entirely spirit beings after salvation, we'd be fine. But addiction is definitely a biopsychosocial, spiritual issue. And it really depends on who or what you are most closely attached. One of the issues with addiction, I don't think most people realize, is that the same part of us that's designed to attach to God and other people in really loving relationships will attach to other things that run the same neurochemical pathways in the brain. So, if I didn't have, and the problem is, if we got rid of all those neurochemical pathways, then we get rid of joy, and we get rid of attachment, and we get rid of love, and we get rid of a whole lot of things. I can't tell you how many Christians I've met that have addictions. It's mostly, with a lot of people, it's a matter of degree.
Well, are Christians any less addicted than non-Christians to whatever we're talking about, whether it's pornography or alcohol or drugs?
Not in my experience, no. I think addiction is an equal opportunity problem. And people don't realize the kind of the insidious nature of addiction. It's crafty, it's cunning, and I would tell you it's cunning, baffling, and powerful. And it has a way of hijacking us without us realizing it's even happened. People underestimate the power of the neurochemicals and the neurotransmitters that God created us with.
Do some people have more of a propensity toward addiction than others?
People have done studies to suggest there's a genetic component to things like alcoholism. But you can also end up without really strong grace-based secure attachments with God and with other people. which people seem to be having a whole lot fewer of those these days. People are extraordinarily vulnerable to addiction. In fact, a lot of times they're pre-wired for it.
What do you mean by that?
I mean, early in life, when the brain is really developing, we are designed to attach to people, parents, caregivers, people that are primary caregivers, really, in really strong, grace-based, secure relationships. Those relationships help set the way the brain's control center processes emotions and processes relationships. And if those things are not set correctly very, very early in life, the brain is going to continue to look for those throughout our lifetime. I mean, God really designed us to be people who attach. And when those attachments are not set up the way God designed it, it doesn't mean the brain goes, oh, well, we just don't need that anymore. It's going to keep looking. And it's pre-wired at that point to attach to things that are not good.
Thinking about relationships, because, often we think of addictions as alcohol or porn or gambling or drugs. What about relationships? You hear people that have, she has, serial boyfriends and she can't live without having a boyfriend. Can relationships even be an addiction?
There's an acronym I use for addictions. It's called BEEPS. It's behaviors, events, experiences, people, or substances that we actually get more strongly attached to than we do God and other people. So, codependency is what you're really talking about. It'll run the same kind of neural pathways in the brain that genuine, grace-filled relationships do. With most people, it's a matter of degree. And the real problem is the absence of grace means the presence of fear. Beeps are all fear-driven.
Do you feel that everyone, and when I'm talking about people, I'm referring to the Christian, because our audience is mostly Christian, and that's, as an inner healing prayer, something we do as inner healing prayer ministry, and this whole project is about prayer, healing of the heart. Do you feel that most, if not all, Christians have, you're talking about a degree, do we all have some sort of addiction? Are we somewhere on that?
I wouldn't say everyone. That's kind of a blanket statement. I don't like blanket statements. But I think it's entirely likely that everybody is. It's like God designed us for grace and grace-based attachments with Him and with others. And for whatever reason, when those attachments are not really secure, we tend to function out of fear. And when we're functioning out of fear, all kinds of bad things happen to us. I mean, addiction really is a biopsychosocial, spiritual issue. Being a Christian certainly doesn't make you exempt.
Well, and that's a big statement, because we've met people that don't believe in the need for prayer or any kind of help, outside of Jesus did it all. And so how do you address someone who says, well, I got saved, or just save them all, because then, we think that at salvation everything is taken care of. Right. How do you address someone who comes from that standpoint?
Two ways. First, suggesting that God can't do that is foolish, because God can do anything God wants, anytime God wants. That's why He's God. But second, even if God miraculously delivers someone from an addiction, if the underlying issues that were driving the addiction, primarily malformed attachments, the presence of fear, and really long-term dysfunctional relational patterns, if those are not addressed, what will typically happen is a switch of addiction. That's why BEEPS, behaviors, events, experiences, people, substances. You could be delivered from alcoholism, become a blooming ministry addict. You can become workaholic, you can become very performance-based, to be very perfectionistic. If you understand the neurochemical process going on that's driving an addiction to like alcohol or cocaine, it's great to be delivered from that. But that doesn't mean you now have all the long-term skills that you were supposed to be learning throughout your lifetime in place. Okay, there's the part that God does, and there's the part that he does that says, work out your own salvation with fear and trembling. Being delivered from addiction doesn't exempt you from that part. And, I've heard people say, I've just been delivered, and I'm like, I'm grateful if that happens. I'm grateful they get saved. And I had a mentor that ran a Christian treatment program, and he'd be like, he was an older guy, he was a cowboy, and he said, he used to tell people, son, I'm so glad you don't want to use right now. You come talk to me when you do. Mm-hmm. Because there's a lot, you could argue the problem with the volcano was the lava comes out. Well, it doesn't just pop out. There's a whole process going on under the ground and inside that thing that causes it to pop. Saying I've been delivered from addiction is great, but there's a lot of other stuff underneath there that help that thing get going. This is increasingly a problem because when I first started working with addictions, this was in the early 80s, and we'd work with people that were sometimes had a history of alcoholism in their family, but generally it was first-generation drug addicts. The last time I worked in treatment was in the early 2000s, and now we were working with second-generation drug addicts. And the level of dysfunction and the lack of any kind of stable foundation whatsoever was shocking, and it was scary, and it was much harder to work with. People that came from Christian homes that had somewhat of a foundation would do a lot better in recovery. But there's a whole lot of people that just have their foundation is almost non-existent. That just saying we just need to get delivered ignores 20, 30 years of not knowing how to do life. Mm-hmm.
I'm thinking of even people I've known and people whose husbands have had strong Christians, porn addictions for 30 years, and they have been through deliverance and healing and with all big name people, and yet that still is stuck, and they're in agony because they don't want to be stuck in that. I guess two questions here. Are some addictions harder to break than others? And do we use the same way of dealing with those addictions? Like, let's say someone's a gambling addict versus a porn addict. Do we deal with them all the same? And are some harder to get free from than others?
The answer is sometimes. There are the more powerfully a beeps changes the way you think and feel and stimulates the release of neurotransmitters in the brain, the greater the addictive potential. And the longer that you do something like that, the more destroyed neurochemistry gets, or the more out of whack it gets. It can take years sometimes for neurotransmitters to recover. Porn gives the brain a really quick boost of all kinds of chemicals, and it is a powerful addiction. But you can also look at food as a really powerful addiction. You can look at work as a really powerful addiction. Methamphetamine or cocaine, really powerful, because heroin. Because everybody is unique, it's really hard to say, well, this is worse than that or that's worse than that. I think you got to look at the entire person. And I know that a lot of Christians agonize. I mean, I watched a guy go to a well-known deliverance person for delivery from crack cocaine. Guy prayed for him. Guess who was high the next day? Was it that deliverance didn't take? I don't know. I want to believe that it did. But there's so many factors below the surface. And I think one of the problems, willpower generally is not enough to overcome addiction. If it was, we'd have a whole lot less people addicted. Yeah. It's not just a matter of willpower. I think you have to train, just like you're going to compete in sports. You need to train to overcome addictions, and it really is biopsychosocial, spiritual, and includes retraining the brain, because the brain's neurochemistry has become scrambled, and it takes a while to get that back. the cool thing about a lot of brain research is it kind of explains what kind of things help retrain the brain. I think brain retraining is pretty critical.
Well, what's the difference between willpower and retraining the brain? Because retraining the brain also, I'm assuming it's going to take work, obviously, on our part. So what's the difference then between willing myself not to do something and retraining my brain?
Well, think about spiritual disciplines. Okay, spiritual disciplines, this is a paraphrase of Dallas Willard. I'm not going to try to quote it because I'll mangle it. But the idea was spiritual disciplines are the things you can do to be able to eventually do the things that you can't do, right? So you start off with what you can do to get to where you want to be. Willpower is kind of saying, I'm just going to hold on, and in recovery we call it white knuckling. I'm just not going to do it, not going to do it. And God, you got to energize my will because I'm not going to do it. Brain training is saying you can't white knuckle forever, but here are some things you can begin doing now that over time will get you where you want to go, because you're now going to start working with the way God designed the brain, giving it what God designed it to need. It's kind of like, maybe I probably shouldn't say it, but it's a lot like waiting around for God to just zap me and all my problems are gone.
Mm-hmm.
Grace is not opposed to effort.
Mm-hmm.
It's opposed to work. So the willpower thing to me just is absurd. Willpower is a declining resource anyway. They've done studies. And the more you have to use willpower to say no to yourself, the less willpower you tend to have. So I won't tell you about the study. It's poor college kids with being tortured with the smell of fresh cookies that they're not allowed to eat. And one group wasn't allowed to, the other group could eat as many cookies as they wanted, and then they had to go complete tasks that required a lot of concentration, willpower to finish. Well, what the study found is that people that had to exercise willpower, they could look at the cookies, they could touch the cookies. I think they even had the odor of fresh baked cookies blown into the room. Quit on those tasks later did much worse than those could just eat as many cookies as they wanted. I can't remember if it's that study or another one said that supportive relationship kind of would help boost willpower. Mm. The takeaway from that is you get somebody who's, say, trying to work on a food addiction or a porn thing, and they go to work, maybe there's snacks around, maybe if you're doing porn there's internet around, your phone's around, but you say no to yourself. And people around you, maybe you're eating stuff you're not supposed to eat, or maybe they're watching porn you're not supposed to. So all day you're telling yourself no. Mm. And you get home at night and you have just you've used your willpower all day long. And that's when sometimes people tend to eat. It's when people tend to do porn. They're at home. It's like they've been good all day, and they can't understand why I can't do it at night. It's because you've been relying on your willpower all day long without connecting to the things you actually need.
Well, what do we need?
We need grace-based connections with God and with other people.
What does that look like just in
Okay.
realistically, in reality? What does grace-based connection with God and people look like?
Okay. Grace has been termed unmerited favor, and that's part of it. But it's like you have a whole pie and you cut a piece. Mm-hmm. The unmerited favor is just a little piece. Grace really means that you are God's favorite and that you are special. A grace-based relationship with God is one in which you are continuing to discover and live from, I'm God's favorite, and I'm special. Grace-based connections with other people mean I'm becoming part of a community that sees me as special and God's favorite and their favorite. And I have the opportunity to learn to connect with other people that way. In that kind of relationship, there's joy, which is really good for the brain. There's learning to how to quiet your body when you're upset. Mm-hmm. It's really good for your brain. It's learning how to be seen, be heard, be validated, be affirmed, be comforted, to weep with people that weep and rejoice with those that rejoice. Grace-based relationship and grace-based attachments are the things that actually displace addictions. Now, it doesn't mean it's easy. There's effort involved. You know, it's really funny, people that don't want effort in recovery. It's like, it took a lot of effort to be an addict. I mean, you had to work hard and stay up late to get whatever it was that you wanted. You worked hard at it. So grace-based attachments, growing grace-based attachments with God and others in a community is a primary task for recovery.
What if someone who's listening doesn't have a community? Can we heal? Can we recover from addictions or whatever the issue is outside of community?
Again, we get back to, can God do anything anytime he wants to? Yes. But did God actually design us to be people that need community? Absolutely. Generally, when people are addicted and they come to God, their thinking is skewed. Their patterns of doing life are skewed. And God designed us to be embraced by a nurturing, supportive community that's going to see us as special and favored. Now, for a lot of people, that's been something like AA. It's something like Celebrate Recovery. I have no problem whatsoever with support groups that will embrace people that are hurting. It's not even so much what they're doing there, although that can be important, but it's the idea that I can have completely blown it, I can be a complete mess, but people here see me as I'm special and favored, even in the middle of my problem. And that's a huge difference between the way most churches receive people. You'll be special and favored if you clean up your act enough so you don't embarrass us. That's exactly what the brain doesn't need, and that doesn't promote recovery. It's the idea of we actually embrace the wanderer, we embrace the prodigal, we embrace the woman who washed Jesus' feet. Communities that are motivated by grace see every relationship, every person they come in contact with as an opportunity to do special and favored. And that's really the kind of community that helps addicts recover. Now, I need to tell you, you can have the perfect community and still you don't. I mean, I wish I could tell people, if you do this 100% of the time, 100% of the time, you will be fine. If I could do that, I'd write the book, I'd do the video, and I'd be on Oprah or something.
Yeah, you would. Multimillionaire.
But think about this. Sin habits that people have that aren't addictions. There's no magic bullet. I mean, the cross takes care of the penalty of the sin. God says, if you confess, I'm faithful and just to forgive you your sin and to cleanse you, which means there's no barrier between you and God. So you can reconnect with the person you need to connect with the most. But there's no magic bullet with anything.
I'm sure you've seen recovery programs fail. Is there, and I don't want to point out any specific ones that fail, but what marks a successful recovery program versus one that people go into it lasts for a little while and then relapse?
There are a few things. One is aftercare and follow-up. People that aren't connected with supportive community when they leave a residential treatment program are going to relapse. It's almost impossible for them to not relapse. It's just the pressures, the triggering into old patterns is simply too strong by yourself. The second thing is there needs to be a strong community element while you're in the program. I designed a program for an alternative sentencing program for people in jail in a county. I did a lot of research about what makes programs successful, and the idea of talk therapy combined with 12 steps had an enormous failure rate. The success rate went way, way up when a model called therapeutic community was involved. Programs that adopted a therapeutic community approach along with talk therapy, along with 12 steps, had a much better chance of success. Programs I know that utilized, now there's some real problems with therapeutic communities. I'm not saying across the board do therapeutic communities. Some of them have been horribly abusive, horribly ugly, nasty. But those that are well done, especially a Christian version, if you combine that with good family treatment, because sending an addict home to an untreated family is not going to last long.
Mm-hmm.
So a community-based model where people are actually speaking in each other's lives. There's accountability, but there's also comfort, encouragement. There's growing love relationship, really helps with family, and then aftercare is vital. And I know some secular programs and faith-based programs that have done very, very well because they've combined all those things.
Let me just sneak in inner healing, because you're talking about Christian, obviously a Christian recovery system or center is going to be different. Where does the inner healing component, going back to what causes addiction in the first place? There's a root there, obviously. They didn't just, in a vacuum, become addicted to cocaine or whatever their addiction is. What about dealing with the root in recovery?
There are two types of trauma. One is type B trauma, which are the bad things that happen that you're talking about, which inner healing works with a lot, with varying degrees of success, because there are enormously different models for how you do that. The other type of trauma that most people miss is called type A trauma, which is the absence of the good and necessary things in life to begin with. Inner healing, however we wish to define it, or just working on past trauma B, is essential. But trauma A recovery is also critical, and you don't get delivered from trauma A. That's the point where you have to put in the effort to relearn the relational skills you didn't get, to regrow the attachments that you never had in healthy ways. It's where you actually, some people would call it life skills. I'd call it getting grace-based attachments worked out in your life. And generally, people with addictions, we tend to have both. There are some unfortunate people that dive into something like cocaine on a whim that end up with full-blown addictions, but generally, strong, secure attachments, at least in some animal studies, make them more resistant to the initial effects of cocaine to begin with. So type A trauma is actually a major underlying cause of, I shouldn't say cause, but it underlies a lot of addiction, which makes us more pre-wired for it, that a lot of inner healing models don't notice. So because I work with trauma A and trauma B, I tend to look at inner healing as not just with trauma B. I look at a complete package of restoring a person to God's original design for them, which is we are relational people. We are in a Trinitarian mode, which means we need relationships with God and with other people. That's our design specs. When you are restored to your design specs, you're much more resistant to addiction to begin with. And the more we're restored to our design specs through work on trauma A and trauma B, I think we're less likely to relapse.
What is God's design for the brain?
God's design for the brain is to be connected in secure attachments with Him and with other people. God designed relationships to be the place of greatest joy in life. And joy not meaning, ooey, I'm excited. It's the actual experience of knowing God or someone else is really glad to be with you. That neurochemistry starts working from the moment we're born. And that's all about grace. If you're special and favorite, if you are my favorite, then I'm glad to be with you. And when I'm glad to be with you, faster than you can think, there's stuff going on with your dopamine in like 1/6 of a second, and it's having an effect on your brain. That kind of neurochemical relationship is how God designed us to work. We're designed to be fueled with joy. We're designed to be able to rest when we've had enough joy. It's the nature of attachment that God designed us for.
I heard you with Elizabeth talking about, if you can do this in 2 minutes, why just the left brain, and so much of recovery is targeting the left brain and its information and how our left and right brain processes.
Okay, I will try to give that to you in 2 minutes. That's okay. Research, especially the work of Alan Shore, are explaining the importance of the right hemisphere of the brain, which has executive control over our entire brain for our entire life. It's the center that does relationships, emotions, and processes body sensations. So when incoming stimuli hits the brain, it'll hit the control center, and it's primarily nonverbal. It thinks as images and pictures. Mm-hmm. And it's filtered through things like, well, who am I attached to right now? Are those people afraid of what I'm experiencing? Do I know what to do with how I feel? And it's processed through my identity. Who am I and who are my people and how do we handle things like this? That all happens in 1/6 of a second. That information is then sent to the left hemisphere, which is primarily verbal. It does logic, reason, explanations. Data flows that way. It doesn't flow backwards. And
so it flows from right to left.
It flows from right to left. So approaches that are geared towards the left hemisphere, like information about addiction, like talk therapy, mm-hmm. for example. It's not that they're bad. It's just that focus is on the wrong hemisphere of the brain because mm-hmm. that's not the part that's in charge. Mm-hmm. The part that's in charge is the right hemisphere. So approaches to addiction and growing grace-based attachment are primarily right hemispheric. It's not that we don't get the left involved because talking is good. It's just there are real specific strategies you can use to get the right brain retrained for recovery.
So and just a quick illustration, basically I can talk to a counselor and that's wonderful and there's going to be some attachment, but that I can have the same conversation with a dear, dear friend who I know mm-hmm. loves me unconditionally, that's probably going to be more effective because there's also a healthy and secure attachment going both ways. So it's right hemisphere because it's feel good and I love you, you love me, and there's this healthy, secure attachment.
It's impossible to make your primary attachment your therapist for long because A, you pay them, and B, they're prohibited ethically from following you around in your life and being part of interacting with you outside of your appointments. So as a counselor, as a former therapist, I would be more focused on helping somebody connect in grace-based attachments with people in their life. I'd certainly want to connect with them that way, but I can't be their primary attachment because hopefully someday they're going to get better and not need to see me anymore. So having them make me their primary attachment, it's not good.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Ed. We appreciate your time. Super honored that you're with us.
Thank you.
We'll look forward to getting the word out about this because it's so important.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I appreciate it.
So, what are your thoughts out there, our audience? I wish that I could ask you and have some interaction, but Kathy, tell me what was highlighted to you for this.
Well, I find it so fascinating. This whole thing that Life Model Works is really talking about is the whole brain science of being wired for attaching and wired for relationships. And those relationships are supposed to be with others and with God. And we're designed to attach, but sometimes that doesn't happen or develop the way it should. You know, I'm a worship leader. I have been for about 32 years now. We are created to worship. We will worship something. If it's not God, it will be something else because we're wired for worship. It's like we're pre-wired from the factory to worship. But if we're not worshiping God, we're going to worship other things. And I think that falls into what Ed is talking about here, that we're created for relationship. We're created to attach and bond and have healthy grace-based attachments. And if we don't have those, we're going to worship something else. We're going to get addicted to something else.
We bond to whatever we get dopamine from, and that is a really key fact in this. And if you think about it, and people that are addicted to their cell phones or Facebook or Instagram or Snapchat, name whatever the social
cell phones
media
in general.
Cell phones in general, because
Screens.
We get a dopamine hit when we have a like on our Instagram or Facebook. But really what we're created for is the grace-based attachments, the healthy attachments, not codependent, because as I asked him, relationships even can be addictive. They can be a beep. And I I love that he gave language to things that we turn to as coping mechanisms. I guess some people would call them coping mechanisms. He calls them beeps, behaviors, events, experiences, people, and substances.
Yeah.
I had a friend that used to say, let's say she's digging into a bag of chips, and I'm like, hey, what's going on? Oh, I'm beeping, and kind of as a joke, because we had heard this terminology years ago about beeps. There's nothing inherently wrong with eating potato chips or chocolate or whatever. It's the motivation and intent of, like, you're digging in to whatever. There's nothing wrong with pain. Facebook. Yeah, there's nothing wrong with social media. But is it a beep for you? Has it become a beep?
And I think people will be surprised if they sit and think about, what are the things I go to for comfort? What are the things I go to when I'm stressed? What are the things I go to when I'm afraid? Paying attention, you might realize, oh, I might have some form of attachment or addiction to this particular thing. And it was really interesting when he was talking about how, yes, you can have a supernatural, profound, life-altering deliverance from an addiction to ABC, whatever that is. But if you don't deal with the underlying attachment issues that are at the root of that are the reason that you're going to these substances or these beeps or whatever, you're just going to have an addiction transfer to something else. Like you could be healed of alcoholism and turn into a workaholic or like or a ministry-aholic. I mean, some people are addicted to ministry, and because it gives them some sense of identity, or it's fulfilling their self-esteem because people are looking to them on the platform. It's fulfilling that need. It's scratching that itch that we're designed to have fulfilled by healthy attachments, grace-based attachments with people and with God.
And I thought it was interesting too, talking about why people join recovery groups such as AA, is that they are fully accepted. The point of those groups is that I can come in and be fully accepted as I am, but with the knowledge and awareness that we don't want to stay there.
Right. If you look at the way Jesus did things, the disciples were invited to come belong with me, hang out with me, and they came to believe as they walked with Jesus.
Well, and Matthew, the tax collector, who's hated by his fellow Jews because he's robbing people left and right in the way he is doing taxes, suddenly now throws all that away to follow Jesus, because obviously there was full acceptance, full love, whatever look Jesus gave Matthew. There was probably more conversation going on than we know about, that come follow me, but he fully was embraced and accepted and belonged with Jesus. And that caused him then to throw his quote unquote bad behavior or bad ways away. It was like, oh yeah, because I'm being fully accepted, fully known as I am, I want to be my true self. I want to do better, so to speak. Thank you for listening today.
Yes, thank you so
much. And please leave some feedback for us on whatever app you listen on, and share it with your friends. It is growing. We see that our listenership is growing, and we'd love for it to grow even more. And if you love this podcast and are listening to it and getting something out of it, would you please consider donating even a tiny amount, even if $1? Every bit helps. It does cost us money to produce this, and we would love and appreciate any gift amount.
Yeah, subscribe, rate, review. That helps us get the word out, helps us get visibility. And you can find more information about us at face2faceministries.org. That's all spelled out, no spaces, and T-O, face2faceministries.org. Find us on Instagram, face2facemin. We have a Facebook page as well. Drop us a message, email us. We'd love to have some interaction with you, and would love to answer any questions that you have. This is built to be a resource for you, and we just are hoping that it's valuable to you.
Let us know. Give us some feedback, because we can't hear you. This is not two-way communication, obviously. Thank you for listening.
Yes. Yeah, so next week we're excited to introduce you to Dr. Marcus Warner, who is also part of the Life Model Works group. He is the president of Deeper Walk International, and we're excited to share that interview with you coming up next week. So subscribe so you don't miss it.
Tune in.
Yay.
Thank you for listening.
Thanks, you guys. We'll see you next time.
Bye.